You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 9th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
وحدة في وجه العدوان والقدرة على حصاره وتركيعه وإشعاره بأنه كيان غريب منبوذ.
Hamas says more captures are coming after 5 Israeli soldiers are killed in Gaza. We'll ask whether this costly point in the war could turn the tide towards a ceasefire. After that, we head to Muscat in Oman for an architectural competition. We'll get the latest on whether South Korea's former president Yoon Suk-yeol could face jail time, and then
London, it does sound different to New York, you know? There's more sky, more cloudy. Yeah, that sort of synthy, fuzzy, kind of cozy but cold feeling.
Sounds of a City with the composer behind a new Netflix romantic comedy. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. As talks over a ceasefire in Gaza continued in Qatar this week and with Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. this week, one of the issues fueling those talks may be the increasing death toll among Israeli soldiers. Israel says 5 IDF soldiers were killed yesterday, bringing to 17 the total killed in the weeks since the end of Israel's war with Iran. The death toll is a sign that Hamas, despite all of Israel's efforts to destroy the militant group and much of Gaza in the process, still has the ability to strike. Well, joining me now from Tel Aviv is Dov Lever, foreign correspondent of the Wall Street Journal. Dov, first of all, do we know what happened on Tuesday?
Well, the military reported those deaths on Tuesday, but they occurred Monday night around 10 p.m. And the story was Israeli infantry soldiers were walking along a road that's around a kilometer away from Israel's border itself, in an area where Israel has operated numerous times throughout the war. And as those soldiers were walking, Hamas militants exploded at least two IEDs, or improvised explosive devices, along the road. And when the soldiers came to rescue the injured, other militants opened fire on them. So a planned ambush, essentially.
And are we able to say, something like improvised explosive devices, it's in the name, it is improvised, it's relatively crude, but nonetheless, when you describe something like this happening, how is it possible that Hamas is still able to strike? How have they managed to step up these attacks in the last few weeks?
Well, I would say Hamas has not really ceased its attacks, but it has had a few successful attacks in the last few weeks. In terms of the explosive devices, according to Israeli officials and Arab officials, they're able to use the explosives dropped by Israel on Gaza. Some of those, not all of those, explode, and they can use some of the explosive material taken from those Israeli explosives and make their own IEDs. They also have the ability to make them through other means, but there is a lot of explosive material inside the Gaza Strip, and Hamas has been able to use it for its own purposes.
So how much of a debate has this caused now in Israel, Dov? Does it change the calculus about ending the war?
I would not say it changed the calculus, but I will say this incident, and there was one with 7 soldiers were killed around 2 weeks ago. They essentially strengthen each side of this now polarizing war inside Israel itself, between those who think that Israel should wrap up the war because of these deaths, that Israel doesn't seem to be able to defeat Hamas using its current strategy, and better to save as many lives of hostages as you can now and end the war. And the other camp says, maybe the strategy isn't working, so we need to change strategy. And that would look like a strategy of siege warfare, wherein the Israeli military would try to move all the Palestinian civilians to somewhere in southern Gaza, and then entrap the militants left behind. So this is the argument you hear. And every time you have one of these mass casualty incidents for Israeli soldiers, it essentially strengthens the parties on either side. Ultimately, at the end of the day, no matter what the polarization here is in Israel, it's up to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to make the decision what's going to happen going forward. He really controls Israel's cabinet, and he needs to make a decision here. And he's at a very important juncture in terms of the war, because, as I just said, everyone agrees the current strategy isn't working. And, he'll need to decide whether Israel essentially fully conquers the Gaza Strip and establishes a kind of military government there, or ends the war in the near future.
And what is your sense of which way Netanyahu might be leaning? Because on the one hand, as you say, this sort of enters into a discussion that has been going on, a polarizing discussion. You've had families of hostages calling for an end to the war in the past. There is, from that side, if you will, maybe a sense that Israel's government has been impervious to the loss of life, even of Israelis, never mind the tens of thousands of Palestinians killed. It's the price of war. Do you have any sense that Netanyahu might be changing his mind on that?
Listen, it's very difficult to know Netanyahu's real intentions, because we're in a strategic chess game between Israel and Hamas, wherein each side tries to hold on to its leverage as much as possible, or to gain more leverage as much as possible, in order to essentially win this conflict at the negotiating table. Now, there are definitely signs that Netanyahu is willing to accept ending the war, although he said he's always willing to accept ending the war based on the same conditions. Hamas disarms and, leaves the Gaza Strip. This is always the same conditions. The question is whether we're getting to a situation where Hamas will agree to certain conditions, where Israel has said it's met its conditions. And I think we're moving in this direction. This discussion, for example, about expelling senior Hamas leaders from Gaza, and it seems that Hamas is open to this. This could give Israel the victory image it so desires. There is, I think, I don't want to say the first time, but we're at a juncture in the war where it is definitely possible to see a clear end to the war, although it's certainly not a certainty at this point in time at all. It does look like they will go for a 60-day ceasefire, but we've been there before, as I'm sure all of your listeners know, and the real difficult part is getting a full end to the war. And of course, for Israel, that means, no Hamas, and Hamas essentially has to agree to the end of its rule in Gaza. So how they break the impasse is still difficult to see, but not impossible. And I think the different sides are moving in a direction where each can claim a type of victory and in the war, but we'll have to see. I mean, all that still needs to be negotiated.
Yes, it will be a continued negotiation. But Dov, just to ask this in another way, perhaps, when you talk about changing strategies, the goal of this war has always been, as you outlined, to end Hamas one way or another, whether that is militarily or convince them to leave the Gaza Strip. If that was ever realistic at this point, do you sense any wiggle room within Israel for Hamas to play some sort of role, just because there isn't necessarily any other way out of this?
Well, first of all, those who in the camp who support ending the war now say, fine, end the war now. Hamas can, a very, very weakened Hamas can, have a extremely destroyed Gaza Strip, and they'll have a very difficult time governing there. And ultimately, that means prepare for a second round, or not a second round, but another round with Hamas. And the other camp that wants to finish the war now says they don't want any more rounds with Hamas. And so, yes, the question is, can Hamas survive in any form politically in Gaza, potentially? Can it be subsumed? Can some of its fighters be subsumed into a new security force? Potentially. So, Hamas may survive as a political party. And anyway, they can expel the leaders of Hamas, but ultimately you cannot. I don't know if you cannot, but it doesn't look like they will try to expel every Gazan from Gaza, and people will have their own personal political thoughts, and they may be pro-Hamas or not. So Hamas will likely Hamas as a political party will likely play a considerable role in Palestinian politics going forward. But as a militant group, this is the question that is really at hand.
Dov Lieber, foreign correspondent of the Wall Street Journal in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Russia has launched its largest drone strike against Ukraine since the war began. Ukraine's air defense systems shot down almost 300 drones fired at the country. The latest drone attack comes less than a week after Ukraine was hit by a barrage of drone strikes, with Russia sending a combined 550 drones and missiles into the country. A wildfire has reached the outskirts of Marseille, France's second largest city, resulting in its airports and roads to be closed. Hundreds of firefighters are battling the blaze that has so far burned through 700 hectares, fanned by winds of up to 70 kilometers per hour. And the New York Yankees are to host Taiwanese Heritage Day for the first time this year. The annual event has been held nearly every year since 2005. The baseball team regularly hosts events for the city's Hispanic, Filipino and Italian communities. It reflects the importance to Taiwanese of New York City, which hosts a large community of Taiwanese who are studying or working in the United States. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Time now for a roundup of all things Oman, because we have a visitor in the Middle Eastern country. Alexis Self, Monocle's foreign editor, joins us now from the Omani capital, Muscat. And Lex, you are there, first of all, for a special architectural competition. Tell us about it.
Good afternoon, Chris. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm here to attend the Muscat Architectural Competition, which it's in its inaugural year and organised by the municipality here. And yesterday announced a team from KSP Engel, which is a practice based in Frankfurt, as winners of a competition to build a new landmark development in the city. And I think this competition kind of typifies a big boom in development in Muscat at the moment, as it tries to attract more foreign investment and visitors to the Omani capital and to the country more generally.
What is your sense, Lex, being there in Muscat? What does it look like now? What kind of development is underway?
Well, this is an interesting Gulf city and has, centuries of history and a kind of different climate from the other, perhaps more famous Gulf cities, those in the UAE, Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, which is in the middle of the desert. Here we're surrounded, on one side by mountains, and I'm actually looking out across the city now, and there aren't high rises here. There's until very recently, there's been quite strict building regulations in Muscat that you can't build above 4 stories. So between the mountains and the coast, so we're on the sea here, are, sort of 3 and 4 story buildings, villas, all whitewashed. Again, another building rule. Now, this wasn't the case with the architectural competition as such, although the building that won was higher than 4 stories. But generally, there is a move to relax these quite strict building regulations in order to allow more development, higher buildings. Not like you'll see in Abu Dhabi and Dubai just yet, but a recognition on the part of the municipality and the government here that, they need to increase density and maybe attract a bit more publicity. And one way of doing that is by building bigger buildings.
It's interesting when you describe that, Lex, because that's surely something that a lot of cities will go through at some point, whether to relax those kinds of regulations, and then also how exactly they want international tourism, international business to be involved in that effort. What is your sense of how Muscat is approaching foreign investors and bringing them in?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I've spoken to a couple of ministers here. I've spoken to the mayor. They're obviously very kind of diplomatic about it. And that's another interesting thing about Oman, its role in the region. It's seen as a neutral country, described often as the Switzerland of the Gulf and even of the Middle East for its diplomatic efforts. I think they would characterize the approach as, a bit more cautious or perhaps thought out than what one government official described to me as the bombastic approach of some of their Gulf neighbors. This has retained the historic and architectural kind of vernacular and integrity of the city, which has actually turned out to be a part of its appeal when it comes to attracting more tourists. The fact that it is in this region that is very warm in the winter, so sees a lot of European and more American visitors, and yet it looks like perhaps a city that you might find in North Africa or in Morocco. I think that they're trying to liberalize and kind of open up a bit more. This is partly as a response to a kind of quite traumatic economic situation in the immediate pandemic era, when they had to get a kind of bailout loan from their Gulf neighbors in Qatar. But I think that a certain number of kind of advantages are converging. As I said, Muscat it is a beautiful place, and people are recognizing that. And then, it's coinciding with this relaxation and opening up of market laws and building regulations that actually is leading to a kind of an influx of interest and capital.
And just finally, Lex, as you did mention Oman being seen as sort of the Switzerland of the Gulf, it's played a role in ceasefire negotiations between Iran and Israel as well. Is it managing to hold on to that reputation as a sort of mediator and neutral party there?
Well, it's been a volatile year so far and couple of years in this region. And as you said, Oman has been successful in the past as acting as a go-between between the US and Iran, but also Israel and Iran, and Israel and the Palestinians, and Israel and other Gulf countries, and actually also Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia. It's a kind of linchpin diplomatically in the region, and partly this was attributed to the Sultan who came before the current one, who was called Qaboos, reigned for 50 years, the longest ruling Arab leader when he died in 2020. His successor, Sultan Haytham, has kept up those diplomatic efforts and, has borne success, most recently with, calming tensions between Iran and Israel and the US. And indeed, Muscat is being mooted as a potential venue for upcoming US-Iran talks to come up with a new nuclear deal that it's hoped will pacify things in the region, or at least between Iran and Israel and the US and the other Gulf powers. So I think, it's unfortunately it's very difficult to say definitively whether tensions will calm down here. But I think that because of what the US is saying and Israel is saying, and because of the success that Oman has had in the immediate past and, further back, I think that people are still seeing it as that intermediary and as a country that is very successful as a diplomatic power in a very difficult region.
Alexa Self, Monocle's foreign editor, joining us from Muscat. Thank you very much. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has appeared at Seoul Central District Court for his second arrest warrant hearing today over his failed martial law declaration last December. The special prosecution team is seeking his detention on charges that include obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and the falsification of official documents. A court decision is expected tonight or early tomorrow morning. And I'm joined now by Rafael Rashid, a Seoul-based journalist, to tell us more. Rafael, good to have you on the show. Could you perhaps first of all just explain what has led to this? This is the second hearing. Where are we in this kind of impeachment and now arrest warrant process?
Yeah, so Yoon was impeached by Parliament in December last year, and then he was removed from office by the Constitutional Court in April. Meanwhile, he's facing a separate criminal proceedings for allegedly leading an insurrection. And so there was a first arrest warrant or arrest in January by anti-corruption prosecutors. He was detained for 52 days, but then he was released when a court said that his arrest warrant was invalid on technical grounds. But now things are moving on quite quickly. We have a special prosecutor, essentially a special probe team that has been appointed since June, and they have requested this second arrest warrant request on different charges, and they believe this time he definitely should be detained as this investigation goes on.
And what is the mood like then in Seoul at the moment, especially if, as you described, this second arrest warrant hearing might have more success than the first? We are hearing that there were some confrontations between supporters and opponents around the courthouse. This is still quite a polarizing issue for South Korea, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely quite a tense one, I would say. But I think it's not as bad as expected. There were meant to be some competing rallies, both for and against Yoon today. The pro-Yoon camp said that they would have several thousand people turn up, but footage shows that actually just a few hundred came. Maybe they were exaggerating, or maybe it's because of the current heat wave that we are also experiencing here. But either way, police took no risks and deployed some 2,000 officers to avoid any confrontations or potentially a riot, which is what we saw in January when pro-Yoon supporters stormed the courthouse that handed his first arrest warrant. Right now, hopefully, so far so good, as in nothing has happened. But I guess it's too early to tell, as it's currently ongoing at the moment.
And Raphael, if this arrest warrant is approved, what kind of punishment could the former president face? What is sort of the maximum penalty, or what is expected for these charges, these new charges that are being brought? Yeah,
so technically the most serious charge at the moment is the insurrection charges. Theoretically, that's life imprisonment or even the death penalty under South Korean law, though the country hasn't actually executed anyone in decades. Right now, we have this, extra this arrest warrant request and obstruction charges, and even though these are technically lesser sentences, they could still result in substantial prison time. But I think the primary reason for securing this arrest warrant is so that he can physically be present for investigation for this bigger insurrection trial, which is underway. And like I said, a very long time in prison if he is found guilty.
And Raphael, just finally, I mean, when you look at the response to this trial, the fact that, as you said today, perhaps there were less people there than might have been expected, what does that say about the impact this has had? I can't help but wonder if that's a suggestion that maybe South Korea is moving on from this at this point and kind of focusing on its future politics and less on the past.
I think that's also one way of seeing it, and I would hope so. I think many people here are sick and tired of this whole, insurrection / martial law chaos that was brought about 6 months ago, and people just want to move on with their lives. There was a snap presidential election last month. We have a new president. I think people want to move on. And just forget this kind of traumatic nightmare that should have never really happened. And perhaps people have lost a bit of interest. Who knows? But I guess this was at the same time quite a significant constitutional crisis that South Korea has faced since democratization in the 1980s. And I guess moving forward, we will have to see how this current government handles the divisions in society and tries to, rebuild trust and bring unity at this time of severe divisions.
Raphael Rashid, Seoul-based journalist, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. Now, how do you compose a soundtrack to capture the feeling of a city? That was the task that was faced by musician Luis Felber on Too Much, a new Netflix romantic comedy that is set in London, which he co-created and executive produced alongside his wife, Lena Dunham. The story is loosely inspired by their own transatlantic romance. Monocle's Laura Kramer caught up with Luis and one of the show's stars, Will Sharp. Luis began by telling Laura how he approached scoring the series.
London, it does sound different to New York, you know? There's more sky, more cloudy. Yeah, that sort of synthy, fuzzy, kind of cozy but cold feeling. I work very closely with Lena on this, and also my music partner, Matt Olchin, who, co-produces and we co-write together. We've been working together for like nearly 10 years now. When we first wrote the first scripts, it was like songs that already existed in the world. But then, we decided on these songs, which later became part of our album Experience, which is also out soon. And then the score, the sort of buzzwords that came up a lot was like cloudy, Simpsons wave, Unplugged in Nirvana Unplugged in New York, Frank Ocean producing Nirvana Unplugged in New York. And that's kind of what the score sort of began as. That was like an extension of the sort of acoustic-y, mellotron-y sound of these songs. Everything in my head in music like starts with a song, And then in this, it was like a show, 10 episodes, and the world just kind of comes out of that.
Now, in the series, Jessica is a New Yorker who moves to London after a breakup. I wondered, if you were to pick another city to move to, what would you be looking for? And I ask this because our Quality of Life issue of Monocle magazine is on newsstands now, and it deals with exactly this topic. Will, it be great to start with you?
For some reason, while he was there, I was like, just think about air pollution. I was just like, what's the least polluted one? But then probably like, that's not the most exciting. I guess you like culture, any kind of culture, and like the opportunity to meet different kinds of people.
What about you, Lewis?
I think my answer would be kind of boring, but it'd be Lima. Because I'm my mum's Peruvian. I got a lot of family over there. So it would just, I've lived in London all my adult life, and it'd just give me a chance to sort of see that side of, whenever I go there, I feel English over there, and I feel not English here. So it'd give me a chance to sort of lean into that a little bit more. Also, the food is amazing.
And just finally, the series has an incredible cast. Of course, Will, your co-star, Megan Stalter, but also appearances from Richard E. Grant, Naomi Watts, Sandra Scott. Will, your career has really taken off post-White Lotus and the Oscar-winning film A Real Pain. Did you have to audition for this? And what was it like working with these other incredible actors?
I mean, so I met with Lena kind of to talk about it. So I didn't have to audition per se, but I guess it was like a kind of, well, does this feel like it'll work? And quite like when you were talking about how you feel, your identity being split between sort of Peruvian and British, like things would come up like that. I also had similar feelings about like having grown up in Japan and then moving to England, and there was a few things that were like, okay, and then tiny things like the character plays five-a-side, and I was like, I play five-a-side. But no, it felt like quite quickly there was like from my point of view anyway, very easy like creative chemistry, and then started talking about it, and in terms of like working with the other actors, I mean, it was just like a real pleasure, because basically every week you got to meet some other hero and then work with them. And working with Meg, like, she's so kind of funny and instinctive, but also very sensitive and kind of like kind. And so, I don't know, that part of it also felt like didn't really need to overthink it. It was just kind of like jump in, and it was always really clear what the story was. So. And
also like Lena leads with joy, like the whole set, every day you come in. It's incredible to see someone orchestrate that for so many people that work on a set, it was a really good energy from start to finish.
Monocle's Laura Kramer with Luis Felber and Will Sharp from Too Much, the series which premieres on Netflix tomorrow. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.